School, and I'm just delighted to welcome you back to Cochran Chapel. I'm delighted to welcome you back if you are one of the reunion classes on a 3 or an 8, and I'm delighted to welcome you back even if you're not, if you are part of our global online audience. What we're doing today is something new and different here at Phillips Academy. In addition to a fairly traditional discussion in person of the state of the Academy, we are also webcasting live this same session, and we're delighted if you are joining us from wherever you might be in the world. Thank you for tuning in, or if you're tuning in after the fact, we're thrilled to be connected to you, and we are equally glad to have people in the room as virtually. If you happen to be in some exciting and far-flung place, we hope you might send us a tweet. We are at Phillips Academy, and we're using the hashtag #ConnectedAndover, and you could do that from in the room, but I'm guessing that's more useful for those on the live stream. And my colleagues Tracy Sweet and Debbie Murphy here will be tracking Connected Andover, #Connected Andover, and at Phillips Academy as a way to bring your comments and questions into the room, and we will toggle between in-person discussion and online discussion throughout the hour or so. My hope is that through this period of time, I'll be able to give you a few basic facts about the school and where we stand, and a sense of our trajectory, some of the plans that we have moving forward. But most important, that we'll spend this time in discussion of things that you think that I, as the head of school, and those of us on the board of trustees and those of us on the faculty, ought to be thinking about in terms of preserving what is great and ought to be brought forward from Andover's and Abbott's past into the present and future, and also things that you aspire for us to do differently than we have in the past. So I very much look forward to your thoughts and your questions as we go, and I consider no question too tough. I have the thick skin on today, so if you have things that we really need to hear, this is a great time and place to do that. By way of opening, I would say also how kind you all have been to welcome my family so warmly to Andover Hill. We've had a wonderful first year. I have a family. My wife, Catherine Carter, is thrilled to be here, and my son and daughter, Jack, is 11, and my daughter is Emmeline, 7. They have been incredibly warmly embraced by people here on Andover Hill as well as those of you from afar, so I'm personally extremely grateful for that welcome. I'm also grateful to you for your patience, as in this year I've spent very little time as a head of school on the road. There are some members of the alumni body who wish that I might have traveled a little more this year, but with the support of the trustees and support of those on campus, we made a decision for me really to get embedded in the life of Andover as much as possible this year. That's been a huge gift to me, I have to say. I've really loved it in every way. I realized that I come to this job not as someone who's worked in secondary schools. I also come as a non-graduate of this school. I have to unlearn a lot of what I did learn in high school and from my other school in order to do a good job here. So though I've had a wonderful time traveling, for instance, to Asia and to major cities in the United States like San Francisco and Chicago, New York, and Boston, I have not spent as much time out in the world with all of you, and I'm grateful for your forbearance as we've done that. But I've been also thrilled by what you have sent my way virtually. I've got a wonderful set of stories from many of you that were, in fact, my real introduction to Andover last summer, and I would encourage you, if you have other stories you'd still like to send me virtually, I'd be thrilled to get them. I wanted to address the state of the Academy in a way from two perspectives for you, really in brief, so that it'll be talking points that we might engage with. I see my job here as head of school as having two main components. One is as the lead teacher, the head teacher of an academic institution, and that's the fun of engaging with students and teaching a class and being someone who thinks about the way in which education is changing and how Andover can play a big role in that. And also as the CEO of a nonprofit corporation, which we are, a $104 million a year enterprise, which has about 500 adults here on campus working to serve 1,100 plus students during the school year, and an organization where in the summer, in a few weeks, every bed will be filled. We run a summer school and we run 4 outreach programs that are very intense, and it's a sort of remarkable thing how well and completely this campus is used. And so I have a job on that side as an administrator and as a leader of an organization where I have the fiduciary obligations of a CEO. And I think every day between those two jobs, how am I spending my time? How should I spend my time? Should I be more focused on our finances, or should I be more focused on being out on the playing fields with our students? I love both sides of that, and you can imagine which is a little more joyful than the other, but they're both wonderful and important pieces of my job, and I consider it a great privilege to be serving you in this academy in both of those ways. To focus briefly on the CEO side of things, the state of the academy, and some of the numeric ways that you might think we would judge our success and focus on the way in which the school is functioning and is functioning going forward, we use a series of benchmarks, as you might imagine. I, like any other person in this kind of position, likes to have might call it a dashboard, but a series of things that we look at that are numerical indications of how we're doing. And I think in each of those primary areas we're doing very, very well. And I take very little credit for this. This is a school I've inherited in incredibly good shape. But let me hit some of the headlines. One way to see it, of course, is in financial terms. So the endowment, as I think you know, stands at between $800 and $900 million, depending on the moment in the stock market, but it's an extremely robust endowment, and one on which we rely very heavily for our $104 million a year budget, which is what we're budgeted for going forward. The kinds of priorities that we use when we think about that budget and that $104 million stem from the 2004 strategic plan that we are using as our guide. And as you probably know, there are two main pillars of that plan from a financial perspective. One is the Youth from Every Quarter commitment, which is translated into being a need-blind school from an admissions perspective. We are in the 6th year of being a truly need-blind school. This sets us apart from our peer schools, and it's something that I think is a source of great pride among the alumni body, as it should be, and certainly a source of great pride among the faculty and students. It means that we are admitting the strongest students from a very, very broad pool. It also is a very expensive thing for us to do, and we recognize this is a core commitment. It's one of those pillars around which we end up building. We end up spending on the order of $20 million a year on that commitment, if you want to think about it in numeric terms. So it's a very substantial part of what our commitment is. And I think you know this, but nearly half of our student body is on financial aid, and about half is a full pay family. In addition to being a need-blind school, one thing we have tried to do as a pillar of our process is not to have inflation be a runaway set of growth over time. And as you probably know, in schools and in higher education, this is one of the great challenges, which is that the rate of increase in tuitions, no matter where you're paying tuitions, has been outstripping inflation for a very long time. So much so that we who are in schools use a different metric for inflation, which is called the HEPI index instead of the cost of living index or the other forms, CPI, other forms of measuring inflation. The reason for that primarily, although there are some other reasons, is that we're pretty much a people-intensive business. If you think about what we spend our money on, it's on people. And even if every year we gave a raise, as we did this year, of just 2% or a little under 2%, which is in fact the inflation rate, the cost of benefits has been going up much, much higher than the rate of inflation. So ensuring that people have health care and so forth results in an annual growth that's much higher than regular inflation. So how does this translate to tuition? This is a challenge that we have every year with in discussions with our trustees, and there are many good points of view on this score. I can assure you this was one of the most robust discussions we had earlier in the winter when we were setting the tuition level. The tuition level for this coming year, if you're a boarding family and full pay, it's $47,200, which we realize is a lot of money. And as a day student, it's $36,700, which we also realize is a lot of money. If you look at our peer schools, we ordinarily use a couple of benchmarks. One is the 8 Schools Association, which is the schools I think whose names would be most familiar to you. We also look at a group of 40 schools called the ABOP schools. In those environments, we, in almost exactly tied with Exeter, are the lowest cost school. So we have sought, even though that's a very large number, to be substantially less expensive than our competing schools in the boarding school world. And it's a very interesting posture. We have sought to keep our tuition as low as we can in order that we don't become a barbell school, a school that has extremely wealthy kids and a school that has the neediest of kids. We try to be a school that has the entire socioeconomic spectrum represented, and one way we can do that is through the need-blind admissions commitment. Another is through the keeping our tuition as low as we possibly can. But it's a challenge, and we recognize, for those of you who are parents, if you have 1, 2, 3 kids, if you imagine having kids, for instance, in boarding schools and college, you could easily see an annual bill for 3 kids of $150,000 to $200,000 a year out of pocket for your tuitions. And you think about, that's after tax. So if you're in that kind of a tax bracket, you need $300,000 to $400,000 in pre-tax money to pay your tuitions. So you can think very quickly, we are talking about not just the 1% of Americans who can do that, but a very small fraction who can actually be in that full pay boat. So we're struggling with trying to figure out what's the right way to think about tuition and financial aid in the context of our larger budget while staying true to our principle. And I think that's something that we will continue in the coming years to try to look at. I should say that anybody, and I'm looking at some college faculty members, anybody involved in schools right now is asking hard questions about financial models in education. How do we keep from the runaway train of increases in cost and try to keep the excellence that we have and try to meet our commitments on financial aid without gouging those who are paying full price? That's a really, really hard and important problem. A second thing that we try to do as part of the 2004 strategic plan commitments, in addition to being need blind, is to have our faculty salaries at the high end of the pay scale for our competing schools. We perceive this to be an extraordinarily important thing in terms of having the quality of the Andover education be truly the best in the world, which we strive for it to be. The numbers we're talking about are not extraordinarily high, to be clear. The very youngest faculty members make on the order of $30,000 a year. The most senior faculty members make closer to $100,000, but we're not talking about enormous salaries. Of course, we do provide housing and food and so forth and great benefits. But what we've tried to do is for any of the age cohorts to ensure that if someone has an offer from Andover as well as from a competing school, that our pay rate will be at least as high as what they would get at any other school. And that's a very important commitment to us. I think it stands for the proposition that we want to be able to attract and retain the best and a very, very broadly based faculty from lots of different backgrounds and with many skills. And as I said earlier to the gathered alumni, I think we're doing incredibly well in that zone. I think our faculty is extremely strong. But having faculty salaries at that high level and also having the need blind financial aid policy as pillars of our budget, that constrains a lot of what else is around the edges, because those are very large commitments. At the same time, from a financial perspective, we also realize that we are running the budget hot. We are running this fabulous Maserati of a school at a high RPM, if you want to use car terms. And I mean that mostly when you look at the endowment draw. So we have an endowment that is approaching $900 million, which is fantastic, but we rely on it at close to 6% draw per year. This is something that's been happening for some time. If you look at what is recommended from the National Association of Independent Schools, the recommendation is that you stay between 3% and 4.5%. So we're outside of the guidelines for a school of our sort. This is something that I think has served the school incredibly well. I think the fact that we've been able to consistently raise a lot of money from the alumni, and we've been consistently able to attract extraordinary kids who are able to pay tuition rates, we've sort of gotten away with having a slightly higher draw rate than we probably should. But I have some concern about that, as putting my CEO hat on. I'm not positive it's sustainable. So one of the commitments that we've made in budgeting out for the coming years is to try to tighten the belt a bit and to change a little bit some of our strategies around fundraising and revenues to try to bring down the draw on the endowment on the order of 10 basis points per year. So where we've been close to 6%, I'm hopeful that we will, at the end of this year, draw no more than 5.75%, and the budget that we've approved for next year would draw 5.65%. If we're successful over the out years, I would love to see us draw 5.5% and 5.45% and so forth until we're closer down into that range. That's an extraordinarily hard thing to do if you see the rising costs in terms of the personnel costs and the benefits, and if we want to keep these pillars of having need-blind admissions as well as highest faculty salaries. So it's a puzzle. We're struggling with it. I think we've had a very good financial outcome this year as we've been tightening the belt in a lot of ways, and as a new person coming in, you can say, we don't really need to do that, and it's a little bit easier to make some tough calls at the beginning of your time. But this is a challenge, is to figure out, can we do all of this amazing programming that we want to do, have these big commitments, and also reduce the draw at the same time? That's going to be a challenge going forward, and one I think we need to focus on. In other non-financial news, some things that I think are much to be celebrated. In terms of those who apply to the school, I don't think it's ever been stronger in terms of the admissions classes that we're seeing, in terms of the quality of the kids, the very large breadth, the every quarter that we're looking from is truly every quarter around the globe. As I mentioned to the assembled alumni earlier, we had 3,029 completed applications. We accepted about 400 kids, 402 kids, which is a little bit under 13% admission rate. Compared to our peer schools, that is the most selective by a good margin. Then on the other side, we look at our yield rate, how many of those kids to whom we offer admission accept our admission as compared to other things. Our yield rate this year is 79%, which if you're in the school's business, you know is astonishingly high. Again, that's substantially higher than our peer schools, and I feel like we are in a great place on this score. I think the way in which Andover is perceived is as a very, very strong, very competitive school and a place where people want to come. My thoughts on that are, of course, that it's a wonderful, wonderful legacy that we're building upon. Many people have built it over many years. I'm a little bit less concerned, I have to say, about the numbers than I am about quality, so I might shift the emphasis a little bit away from the quantitative side of that to the qualitative side. One thing that I've seen in this initial year is that kids for whom this is a great experience, it's an astonishingly good experience. It's a fabulous experience. I'm also quite aware that there are some kids who come to Andover and who don't have as good an experience and for whom it's not as great a fit. So when we talk about having thousands of kids apply for admission, I would focus a little bit more on trying to make sure that we're getting the kids to apply who we think are going to be a great fit, rather than trying to get the largest number of kids to apply. Because of course, when we get kids to apply who we don't admit, we also have to send them a no thank you letter, which is slightly painful. And it's also the fact that we think that if we are doing very good recruiting in lots of different communities and really describing well what Andover it is and what kind of kids succeed here, that we will have the strongest kinds of classes. It's also the case, I should note, that the larger number of admissions files we get, we have to add people to the admissions office to do justice to these wonderful kids. And unlike a very, very large college, we spend a lot of time on every case, as you can imagine. So I'm really proud of those numbers, but I want to calibrate the way in which we think about it, how we think about what success is. It's really how great is the class that we have, how great an academic experience and social experience the kids have, rather than literally just the numbers of our admit rate and our yield, which are important, but I think not entirely dispositive. Last thing I'd mention in this sort of metrics sense is our fundraising prowess, which has been substantial, and I'm grateful to all of you for this. As you probably know, the school set out to raise a $300 million capital campaign. It spanned over a period of very difficult financial years, of course. When I came into office, it was nearly completed, but by January, February, when we closed it out, we were at $322 million, which is a fantastic outcome, and really one that is a testament to this school. It's one of the largest campaigns of any independent school in history. It's something that I take very little credit for. I just had to not mess it up for those first few months. It was something that all of you did and many others did over a long period of time. That capital campaign is a fabulous thing. I should note that most of that money was committed and has been spent, in fact. So people often say, well, you just got $300 million or $322 million, you should be set for a while. And the truth is that in some respects it was a down payment on the need-blind commitment. It's also something that hasn't all come in. We have many pledges outstanding and so forth that are still to come in. So when we have discussions with the faculty about why can't we do that great new program we would like to do, didn't we just raise all this money, the fact is it's already been built into our model over a period of time. So I calibrate a little bit our excitement about spending all the money you have given to the school and others have given based on the fact that it's kind of built into the model, but clearly a huge, huge success. I would say that while we've been very successful on the capital side, we've also had the blessing of the annual fund being a very, very substantial part of our budget each year. As I mentioned earlier, on the $104 million a year budget for the school, about $11 million of that comes from the annual fund. We couldn't do it without the $50 and the $100 and the things that come in, as well as the non-SIBI gifts of $1778 or higher. If we didn't have that, we couldn't run the school the same way. So it's actually very important to note that that too is built into our very substantial budget each year. So those are some of the metrics that I think are important to note. We can come back to questions on any of those, but let's put those off to one side. I wanted to mention two other things and then go to questions. So if I take off my CEO hat and put on my head teacher hat, this is the part where I think there's enormous excitement on campus, and there's opportunity for real growth and leadership on the part of Andover. One of the ways we've been thinking about this year is a conversation about what it means to be teaching at the secondary school level. What does it mean to think about 21st century skills, one of these buzzwords that's out there all the time, but we need to define that for Andover and figure out how do we prepare kids for the most connected and global type of an environment in which they're going, for the kinds of colleges and university experiences that they're having, but also how do they cope with and take advantage of the challenges associated with technology, which is an area that I've been studying extensively. The way we've framed this conversation is to say we don't have one answer, and there isn't one answer, certainly not one answer for the entire world, but there's not even one answer for Andover, but rather we need to look at what are the possibilities and what are the challenges associated with a rapidly changing period of time where kids are learning in different ways. We know that from fields as distinct as neuroscience through to fields like social psychology and education. We know also that kids are using devices in ways that are good and bad as they are learning more and in different ways. And we need to figure out which piece of these do we want to build upon, how do we want to take advantage of the most exciting of the new technologies, and which of them do we want to keep out of the Andover experience? How do we want sometimes to get kids to turn off the video game or turn off the cell phone or turn off the social media that might be a distraction, in fact is a distraction in some ways. And the way we've thought about it is a frame that we've called connected learning, to think about things that are both connected through technology and things that are connected not at all using technology. An example would be the class on curation that students can take through the Addison. In that case, students who have been studying art can actually curate a show using the materials that are in the Addison. That's a non-technical thing to do, but it's connecting the kinds of assets that we have. I like to think about some of you as alumni coming back into classrooms, whether in person or otherwise, where you have an area of expertise. I think that's a good form of connected learning. So thinking about what does the new technology allow us to do, and how can we make the most of that, whether that's through online programs or through iPad programs that we have underway that we're testing and we're assessing, or through other forms of connected learning that draw upon the amazing assets that we have here as a residential environment. And I'm completely sure that at the end of the process of looking at innovation in teaching and learning, we are going to reaffirm the importance of the residential. I don't have any hesitation in saying that we are going to say that it's very important that we come to this 500-acre patch of land to study and learn and to have meals together and to play sports together and to hang out in the dorm late at night. But I think there are things that we haven't yet embraced that can make the classroom experience richer. I think we can share some of what we're doing in really interesting ways through outreach, using the technology, and those are the things that we're going to be exploring in the years to come. And the last note I would put forward before breaking for questions is that we're headed now into a strategic planning phase. And today, I think of this conversation in a way as calisthenics for that process. This is a time when we can have a conversation as the alumni and the administration of the school and those who are coming to us through the online medium as well, as we start to think about what's the strategic plan that will replace the 2004 strategic plan for the academy. And I want to talk about this in a few slightly different ways than it may have been done here in the past. I think we are really convinced that the 2004 strategic plan was an excellent one, and it was completed almost entirely between 2004 and today. It is a wonderful plan that has been wonderfully executed and really has guided this school to a great place. It's also one that has very few little bits that still need to get done. It's a great moment to have new ideas and a series of new commitments. And again, I think we're going to reaffirm a lot of what we're doing. I don't expect that we are going to decide we're no longer a youth from every quarter school and go off in some other crazy direction. That's not the game plan. So we'll do a fair amount of reaffirming. But I think we have the room. I think we have the mental space to think very big about Andover's role in education for our own kids. We can think about it for the kids who are coming as part of our outreach programs, and I think we can think about it more broadly. What's Andover's place more broadly in the world of education at this moment of transformation? How much do we aspire to be a part of that conversation broadly? And I would love to see the strategic planning process be one that's really porous and really connected, that this is one where wherever you might be in the world, you might feel you have a role to play in this conversation. And though we have a strategic planning committee of 14 people, I hope very much that that task force is really not about writing a plan or making a plan in its own in its own right, but really about reaching out and pulling in ideas, the best of the ideas that we can find from the Andover community, and affirming something that we're excited about as a broad community. So I'm hoping that both in terms of substance, it's going to be ambitious and exciting, but also in terms of process, that it will be ambitious and exciting and draw upon what, if there is a consensus among the broad Andover community, we're excited to work on, and frankly, what we're excited to pay for, noting that we have some financial challenges as we go forward and seek to do that. So finally, by way of closing, I just want to say I'm so grateful to each of you for being here. It's beautiful sunshine outside, and I can tell you if you're from afar, there are a lot of people here in the chapel. I'm grateful for the engagement on the substance of the school and where we're going, as well as your generosity to the school, and I look forward very much to having some conversation now. I want to leave you with the 4 questions, though, that are the ones that are most on my mind as we're breaking for the summer and as we're heading into the strategic planning process. And maybe these are ones that you could either give me some feedback on or help me to figure out how to answer. First is, how should Andover define 21st century skills? What, if anything, is different about the kind of environment where we need to be training our kids than it was, say, 50 years ago? Second is, what is the role of technology in teaching? Where does it belong and where does it not belong? What are the kinds of ways in which we ought to embrace it and where should we resist it? Third, how can we ensure that every student who enrolls at Andover has every opportunity to succeed here? I think one of the challenges of being a truly diverse, truly need-blind school is that kids come from very, very different levels of preparation when they come here. The honest truth is we need to have a very broad set of expectations for kids coming in if we in fact are recruiting kids as broadly as we are. Just as an example of this, within mathematics, we have 22 different entry points. So the strongest kid to the kid who has the least background in math, there are 22 different ways in which they can come into our program. That just gives you a sense, I think, of the preparation gap that's involved here, and we want to make good on the commitment to any kid to whom we offer admission to Andover. And then last one that I'm thinking a lot about, which is what role, if any, should Andover have in the national and in our international dialogues about the future of education? I know that one thing that has characterized this school is a very attractive humility. I've been very pleased, and I share this or seek to share this as a trait, which is recognizing that we don't know everything, and Andover, I think, has never held itself out as the best or the most amazing school, and I think that's very important. On the other hand, I think we're in a really interesting moment in history where people are talking very openly about how do we improve secondary education in the world, and I think Andover has something to offer, but figuring out how we engage in that while also taking care of our day-to-day business here on Andover Hill, I think, is an interesting challenge. So that's food for thought, and I'd love to pause now and open for some questions from all of you in the room. Please feel free to come up to the mics and ask, and I think we've also had some that were sent in advance. So as you think about coming up, please don't be shy. I might start, thank you. I might start with some of the pre-prepared questions. But please do not hesitate to come on up. Okay, so I've got 3 here, which I will slowly start in on, but don't hesitate, and we'll toggle back between in-person and otherwise. They've been handed to me in an order I don't know about, but Tracy Sweet must know what she's doing. The first is, since reading the New York Times and Philippian, I've been awakened by the familiar debate surrounding gender equity at PA. What is the administration doing about the issue? Well, this is a great question and a super important question. I think I mentioned earlier, for those of you who were in the chapel, that the dominant discussion point, I think, for this year in terms of the campus debate had to do with girls in leadership. I think it was a very healthy discussion. It is a discussion that is absolutely ongoing and not in any respect resolved. I think it came this year from a couple of different places. One is we, as the administration, in fact, meant to bring up some of this affirmatively as we began to think about what does coeducation look like after 40 years, inspired by that quote from head of school Gordon, who was the last of the Abbott heads of school, who said, what will it look like 50 years ago? We've been thinking about, so what does it look like 40 years ago, and how far have we come? Do we have unfinished business still? So we stirred this up a little bit as an administration to ask what I think is a hard and important question. I think it's been in the national dialogue. Of course, Sheryl Sandberg's book and otherwise, I think, has brought this topic into play. And then in the winter and into the spring, we began to talk about it particularly vis-a-vis girls and the school presidency. I think you probably know this if you read the New York Times article, but 4 of the last 40 school presidents have been girls, 36 boys and 4 girls. So there's a fact there, there's a data point there. And so much of the discussion has revolved around what does that mean and how do we work on it. So we as the administration thought about this extensively, and we said what we'll do is we will urge the student council, which is the group that sets up this election, to consider ways in which they might restructure the process. Could we have a conversation about whether or not this is a structural issue, or is this one that we just leave in sort of a libertarian fashion to the vote of the student body? And what the group came up with was they decided upon a co-presidency model, the notion that they would elect 2 presidents. But in the discussion, the students and otherwise, as framed with some faculty involvement, decided they weren't going to specify 2 different genders, that they would have 2 co-presidents, but not say it must be a boy and a girl or otherwise. And the student council then ratified this. This was not an administration decision, this was the student council's decision. And there was then an election, and the election brought out a large number of candidacies. There were a large number of boy-girl pairs, and there were a number of boy-boy pairs. I don't believe there were any girl-girl pairs that signed up. And as it boiled down to a boy-girl pair, 2 attractive, fabulous candidates, and 1 boy-boy pair. And we then had more discussion, and we had a wonderful debate up here on the stage, and truly, truly substantive, interesting discussion. And in the meantime, a New York Times reporter got interested in this and started to cover it and write it. And at the end of it, the election resulted in the boy-boy pair winning. So you could imagine then the discussion that ensued from there, both about the process and about the way in which we look from here, and also what does it mean about the student body that, having discussed this and focused on it and tried to do a certain restructuring, we elected, they, I suppose as the boys, but from their perspective saying we elected 2 boys. So this has been a super robust conversation. There are a large number, I think, of very effective ways in which it's been talked about on campus. There's a women's forum that's been active since the 1980s. There's a project called the Girls Leadership Project, which has been very active in focusing on mentoring between girls who are seniors and girls who are lowers, and we're thinking about how do we expand that to girls who are juniors with girls who are uppers. The students created a group, a very vocal and effective group called Feminism Equals Equality. One thing that the Philippians showed was through a poll that 75% of students associated the word feminism with negative traits. So they then launched a discussion that said, how do we recast the term feminist in a way that's either more neutral or positive? So that was a fair amount of the kind of guiding force. It resulted in a bunch of t-shirts that said feminist on it that boys and girls and men and women wore around campus and spread a lot of discussion. So if the question literally, and that's mostly by way of background, although I've sprinkled in a few things we've done along the way, the question is how is the administration handling this? It's to say, I think, first of all, that we're acknowledging that Andover is not perfect, that we have unfinished business from the merger 40 years ago and from coeducation, and we need to think this through. I think it's acknowledging that we are part and parcel of a larger global conversation about issues that involve gender, and something we need to be engaged in and recognize. And it's an acknowledgement also that there is no simple answer. This is not a knee-jerk thing where we ought to head in one direction very quickly. It's something where I think as a community this has to be addressed at a cultural level. So I've thought about it mostly with that head teacher hat on as a teaching and learning opportunity. I've tried to structure as many conversations as I could with boys and girls where we took this head on, where we made it as safe a space as we could for people to speak their mind, boys and girls. We've brought in lots of different topics, some easy to talk about and some hard to talk about. There's been a lot of discussion, for instance, about the boy culture and leader culture around sports and how that affects this. There's been a lot of discussion about sexuality and the kinds of sexual relationships that kids have with one another and the gender dynamics that are in that, which can get quite complicated to talk about, although we had a very open faculty meeting with students on that topic. So we've tried to figure out what are all the strands that come together in this incredibly complex and important topic. I can't stand here and say the administration has the answer and we're going to be, a truly equal and strong school in that particular way, but I can say that we will continue to see this as a teaching and learning moment. And I think if you were to ask many of the girls who just graduated, many of the boys who just graduated, that they learned a ton from their own advocacy on this topic. I think that they would feel that they were supported in the way in which we brought the conversation together, and that they considered unfinished business that they're passing down to kids who will come back next fall, and I think I see that in the same way. Do you want to come up and, yeah, please. Are you on the same topic? Oh, good. Oh, please, yes. Thank you, George.
Yes, I wondered how you see your work with the Digital Library of America relating to your work here.
Wow, thank you. That's a nice question, George. Thank you. So one of the projects that I was working on before I took this job was an effort to create a digital public library in the United States, quite a far-flung thing from running a school of this sort. It's something that in lots of other countries they have created national digital libraries, and I felt like this was something, along with a bunch of colleagues, including a man named Bob Darnton, who's a graduate of this school, and the university librarian at Harvard. We decided to launch an effort around it. We have created DPLA, as it's called, Digital Public Library of America, which launched in April. We now have a new executive director, so I'm no longer out of the job of having to worry too much about it, and I'm no longer the principal investigator in all the grants, which is good. I've freed myself from those fun but serious obligations. But I see it as connected in a conceptual way to the business that we're in, thinking about the future of education. And when you think about the future of libraries, it's a totally fascinating problem. It's one to say, if we increasingly head toward e-books and digital materials, what comes of the library? What comes of the great research libraries? What becomes of the Oliver Wendell Holmes Library? What becomes of the Memorial Hall Library in downtown Andover? What becomes of the historical societies around the country? And how do we ensure those are vibrant and important institutions even in a digital age? And I think that the schools and libraries are both in the information business. I think in both cases they are being or will be soon disrupted by the technology in the way that industries like the newspaper industry, which, as you know, is in very tough shape financially. If you think about the recorded music industry or the movie industry, the telecommunications industry, all these things have been highly disrupted by this technology. I think the library business and soon the education business will be similarly disrupted in important ways. So I see many of the things that we're working on in those two areas as being connected, and they're literally a little bit connected, which is we have been digitizing materials from the Abbott archives and from the Phillips Academy archives, and they've been handled down at the Boston Public Library, which is a feeder up into the Digital Public Library of America. So if you were to go online to the dp.la and search on Phillips Academy or Abbott Academy, you would come up with things that we are digitizing here, which are early entrants into the amazing repository that's going to be a global digital library. I would point to one other bit before I turn to another topic, which is the notion of the Sid Knaufel map connection. I don't know if you've seen this, but Reuner Sid Knaufel from the class of 48 gave us an unbelievable map collection, truly world-class one, which we've now digitized with the help of some federal funds. It's physically accessible in the Addison, but it's also been digitized and available online and as part of the Digital Public Library of America collection. So that'd be another example where we have treasures here. We want kids to get involved and to use it in the physical way of actually touching the paper, but also if you're a scholar elsewhere and you can get access to these materials and have them digitized, that seems to me a good thing to do. So thank you for that. Yes, please.
My name's Erin Chantry, and I'm class of 2002.
Awesome. Welcome back.
Thank you. My father's a professor and always tells his students, you'll be working in a career that doesn't even exist yet. I myself am an urban designer, which is an industry that really there wasn't a need for into the 80s, so it's a relatively new profession. We hear a lot about how to teach our students now, but when I was at Andover, I didn't even know urban design existed. So my question, it took me a long track to find it in my education. So my question is there a discussion that not only revolves around how we teach, but what we teach? Obviously, I've been very well served from my strong foundation in the traditional subjects, but could have also benefited from new curriculum that's developing every day.
Erin, that's great. It's a fabulous question, and I'm a believer in, I think, the sort of embedded statements that are there in your question. So one of those is that we see jobs changing enormously, and I think you're a perfect example of that. Class of 2002, you graduated from here 11 years ago, and you're in a job you didn't know existed then and may not have existed. In my field, I came from working in technology and studying how kids interact with it. One of the big areas, for instance, is computer security and hacking. We know from the discussion of the U.S. Department of State and Department of Defense and others, that we have many too few people in the United States who actually could fill the jobs needed in an era of cyber warfare. That's an example where we wouldn't have been talking about that when you were here. And we have to think about, is it our job or is it someone else's job to help prepare kids for that? And I think this is a really deep, almost existential question for a place like Andover. This is a school that has provided for 235 years an amazingly broad education for kids. We see ourselves in the liberal arts tradition, and that's a good thing. And I think it's really important to realize we're not a professional school, and we shouldn't be in the business of, training kids in very precise aspects of, something that would aim for a technical job. On the other hand, we have to realize that our curriculum needs to evolve in various ways. So I think there are a couple of directions that we'll explore in the strategic plan. None of these are statements. These are more in the form of either hypotheses or questions. So one way in which I think we have to think about it is, if you look back on the education of an Andover or an Abbott student in the 1850s, as I have, and looked at the curricula that they went through, it was very, very heavily in Latin and Greek and oration and so forth, rhetoric, things you would imagine, but it had very little of things like mathematics and science and other forms of literature that we would consider today part of an education in music and arts. So it's going to change. It will change from what it is today. There's nothing perfect about the Andover education today, and we do have to look at things. Computer science is an example, but it's not the only example, where kids may need to know something more about how this works to be a part of that education. And I think the challenge we face at a school like Andover is we've been so good, or you've been so good, for so long at so many things. It's really hard to take something away, and particularly when you take things that are really, beliefs that people hold on tightly to and care a lot about. But I'm also totally convinced that we can't just keep piling more and more on. We can't just make diploma requirements heavier and heavier because we believe that kids need to learn more, and we drive them into a stressful, place that's unhealthy. I don't think that's good. So we have to be serious about pulling some stuff out as we put new things in. And that's been the discipline we've used this year, which is to say, if you want to add something to the budget, or add something to the curriculum, or add something to someone's workload, whether a kid or an adult, you need to show me an offset. It needs to be at least pulling something out of a similar size. And that's a hard exercise, as you can imagine. When you've got 200 faculty members with awesome ideas, we tend to be much better about the adding on, and very, very infrequently willing to pull something out. So I could go on in your awesome topic, but it's a big piece of what we're talking about in the strategic plan, and we'd love your help to think about it. So thank you. Tracy, I'm going to switch to one of these, and then we'll go back to the in-person if that's okay, and I'll try to be faster. Via Twitter, we have a question which is, what can alumni do in this era of connected learning? Can we help current students? My answer to that is absolutely. We'd love your help, and I think there are a couple of ways to do that. I think our students love mentorships. I think they love instances where people who are in exciting fields are willing to spend time with our students, whether on an intern basis. As you know, it's very competitive to get internships these days, even unpaid ones. So where you're in a field where we've got a lot of students interested, either for a week when they could shadow you during a break or during a summer, you could be hugely useful there. I think where you have relationships with faculty members or want to build them, and you could be a guest, whether either virtually or in person in some class where you have a particular bit of knowledge, that would be extremely useful. I'm thinking, for instance, of the kinds of trips that the students are leaving in a week or so for India, for instance, on the Niswarth program. I suspect there are many of you who have connections either to the place of India or the kinds of service learning opportunities that they're doing. I think there are lots of ways to get involved, and we would hugely welcome you doing that. So please stay in touch on that score too. Maybe we'll come over, sir, to your side.
I'm Dick Bell from the class of 1963. There are tremendous social problems in the United States now, and I look to, as many others in the audience do, I'm sure, to Andover graduates as the people who are going to have the skills to face some of these problems. And my question for you is, to what extent do you think it is in your plan or is appropriate to begin to expose Andover students to the problems in the outside world while they're here? When I was here and my classmates, this was a very cloistered, inward-looking place. I don't know to what extent it's still that way, but I wondered if you had feelings about opportunities for kids to do public service or community service, or is that taking up time that would better be used here for traditional educational purposes?
Dick, thank you. It's a great question and feels a little like a setup because it's such an important one to where we're headed and what kind of a school that we are. I think if you were to ask, quite honestly, students who are here now about how much Andover is a bubble and how much it is connected to the outside world, you get a range of different answers. And I think most students would emphasize the bubble side, would say that when you're here, it's a very intense experience. It's a wonderful experience, but it's one that's not deeply connected either to the outside world of the town of Andover or the city of Lawrence, which is next door, or the broader world as it emerges. But I think most students would tell you that a commitment to community service is a big part of their experience here. I think one very specific way in which that's true is through the community service program that runs 30 plus community-based service learning programs around this area. I think the vast majority of students in any given year participate. It's not mandatory, but it's guess that it's in the 700 to 800 students actively participate out of 1,100 in any given year in community service, and that there are a number of faculty members who believe so deeply in experiential learning that they have built it into their courses in various ways. One very interesting example of that is there's going to be a course, an interdisciplinary course taught by a few faculty members about Andover Hill. And the idea is to study the place, to tie into the Peabody and so forth, but also to tie into the community and to learn about some of the problems that are immediately around us and to figure out some service learning ways to address that. I would say that a fair amount of the work that goes on in the community service office relates to the city of Lawrence, which is, as you know, the schools are in receivership. It's a very complicated moment in the history of that town. We've been working very closely to try to integrate a lot of our different activities, whether it's with the Boys and Girls Club or Si Se Puede, which is another one of the organizations there. We have a new program this year that I think is very exciting with a program called Squash Busters. I don't know if you know about the urban squash movement, but squash happens to be my sport, so I'm really excited about this. And there are a bunch of PA alums who are involved in this project on a national level. They've just opened an organization called Squash Busters in Lawrence, and the effect of that is that 30 kids from Lawrence, from the schools there, come to PA to play squash a couple times a week, as well as Brooks, and they also then take some classes while they're here with some of their teachers. And our students are involved both in playing with them and coaching them and doing it as a community service experience. And it's, I think, a fantastically successful both learning academic program as well as a way to spread the sport, and I think it's a two-way learning experience in great ways. One thing that has been imperfect, I would say, in the past, but we're working on extensively, is the non-SIBI Day. This is something actually came out of inspiration from Tom Beaton and other alums. We haven't done as well on campus as you all have out there in the world, which is a really interesting thing. So this year we're resetting a little bit, and we're doing a non-SIBI Day. There's going to be a mandatory day for kids to do community service on a Friday and a Saturday in the spring. And we've decided that for each year there's going to be a different theme. So education is going to be one year for one of the years, homelessness and so forth, environment. So the kids, if they're here for 4 years, will work on a service learning project on each of these topics each year. And I think we'll try to do a better job of tying into what you guys are doing all around the world on these topics. So I think it's a hugely important question, and one where when I talk about connected learning, that's a big part of it, which is how do we get connected to this larger issue around the world and the issues that are right here in our neighborhood that are hard and need to be worked on. Thank you. Yes, please.
Fred Guggenheim, class of 1953.
Welcome back.
We marched out about the blue wave rolling, conquering the red and gray, and it's rumored you're an Exeter alum.
That's true.
So how would you compare our school in terms of money, mission, and student body to Exeter's?
Wow, that's an extraordinarily hard and good question.
The short answer is okay.
I'm sorry, short answer. Yeah, I'll go with the short answer. So I bleed blue. I've gotten rid of all of my red gear, and I'm all in here. And on Exeter Andover Day, which I've learned now to call Andover Exeter Day instead of Exeter Andover Day, I absolutely cheer for the right side, which is to say the Andover side. But I loved my Exeter experience. The truth of the matter is I am who I am largely because of that extraordinary learning experience and that social experience. I left a job and tenure that I loved at Harvard Law School to come back here, in part because I thought that this was the place where I could make the most difference in the most lives of young people in a way that I benefited from. So I won't say a bad thing about Exeter ever, because I loved it. There are differences, though, between the schools. I will say that one reason I was convinced this would be potentially a good match for the next however many years of my life was just a sense of innovation and a sense that the trustees wanted to try some new things, particularly educationally. And I think one of the differences that I sense is that this faculty here is quite ambitious in terms of trying a lot of new things in the classroom and in these connected ways. I think Exeter, because of the Harkness tradition and how successful that's been across the board, tends to use fewer teaching methodologies. And I tend to think that different methodologies work in different disciplines in different ways, and also that we should innovate more. So that's something that I think does set the schools apart a little bit. A place in which where I think we're behind Exeter is the sheer size of our endowment. They have about $200 million more in the bank than we do, and they are more disciplined than we are. They spend no more than 4.5% from that endowment every year. They will have open water on us within a few years if we don't fix our financial model. And that's just something that we have to come to grips with. Does it matter if they have $1.5 billion and we have $1.1 billion? Maybe, maybe not. But I think we have to realize that if you project out, that's where we'll be in a few years. And on that topic, I just think that's a really good community conversation to say, do we want to keep burning, at this burn rate if that means that we'll be less competitive? The other thing I will say is that in the last bunch of years, including this year, those kids who were offered places both at Andover and Exeter in large numbers came to Andover over Exeter. And I think that's a symbol that we are speaking to some great kids and we're getting a lot of them to come here. And I think that's a very positive sign of our momentum.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hope that was diplomatic enough while also being realistic. Quite aware this is being broadcast to a whole lot of people and probably recorded for posterity. But yes, sir.
Hi, Bill Hartman, class of 63.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I've been extraordinarily impressed and delighted to see Andover and its vitality. And I appreciate how you have outlined a unique opportunity, an extraordinary opportunity for the school to demonstrate further leadership, particularly during challenging times. With respect to your fourth area about global, potential global involvement, et cetera, I think in terms of edX, where MIT and Harvard initially started in this area and they're opening it and extending it. Can you give a bit of an perspective of what some of the other leading secondary level institutions are doing, and to what extent you see, I know it's early stages, but possible areas of working together?
It's a wonderful question. I'm a big fan of the edX initiative. It's something I worked a little bit on before I left Harvard. This is a commitment on the part of both MIT and Harvard, each to put in $30 million for $60 million in total, and then lots of other great schools, Wellesley and Berkeley and others have come together to offer free online courses on the web, and to do it in a way that I think is quite thoughtful. I was involved a little bit in teaching one this spring where colleagues of mine at Harvard Law School did a class called Copyright X, and I was one of the guests who came in. It was a lot of fun. And what was great about that particular class was it wasn't the standard MOOC or massively online open course where it just was a whole bunch of lectures on the web and some exercise and so forth. It was one that actually had a component that related to the residential life at the school. So it was a group of students, call it 50 students, who were Harvard Law School students, were taking a copyright class in a regular copyright classroom, but 20 of them were also teaching fellows in the online course. So all of the classes were recorded, and there were all the materials were free and online, and all the exercises were ones that could be done digitally. But there were 20 students who were connecting each to 25 students who were lots of places all around the world, not enrolled at Harvard Law School, and they had been selected out of about 5,000 people who had applied to take the course. And it was a really robust online conversation as well as in-person conversation, and the response rates, the extent to which people actually passed the exams, finished the courses and so forth, were very, very high compared to the massive online courses. So I mentioned this example as one of the edX experiences because I think it's a really good blend. I think the future is going to be in hybrids, not in pure plays. This is a controversial statement. Some people disagree with me. Some people think that it's just all going to be about one star professor and zillions of people taking that one course. But I actually think it's going to be about places like Yale or places like Wellesley or places like Grinnell College who are going to figure out how do you affirm what's great about being in person, but also use the technology in forms of leverage in really interesting ways? So I'm interested in that kind of experimentation. I would say that one of the reasons this was an exciting job for me to take on was, as I was in higher ed and was working on some of these things at Harvard, I realized the universities were off on a really good track. Actually, in Harvard, I think is on a great track with it. And I felt like in secondary schools, we hadn't really gotten serious about it yet. So I think particularly for our kinds of schools, residential boarding schools, there's not as much experimentation yet, and I think for Andover it's a huge opportunity to be a leader and to do it well for our kids. And there are a bunch of ways we're doing that. One is to say that we perceive that our kids, by the time they graduate college, if they're coming into the 9th grade next year, they're almost certain to take an online course. It's almost certain they'll be required to. And if we as a preparatory school don't give them the skills to take that online course, we're not doing a very good job of preparing them. So we're actually figuring out what are the skills associated with taking the kinds of courses they may well take. How do we teach for that and take advantage of the really great parts of it? Another way to think about it, though, is to say we're trying to do really interesting things around outreach. So as you probably know, we have a program called MS Squared, Math and Science for Minority Students. It's been going for many decades, and it takes the following form. Kids come here for 3 summers between their 9th and 10th grade year, their 10th and 11th grade year, and their 11th and 12th grade year as part of summer session. They come from communities where their math and science program is not so great and where they have very high potential. And we promise their schools we will not recruit them to Andover. We say we will not try to get you into our regular program. But when these kids graduate, they perceive themselves to be Andover alumni, which I think is fantastic. It's this really great, robust program. But if you think about the education that we're offering in this particular case, they go back to a program that isn't particularly strong when they go home. But at the same time, we, bless you, are running these really great classes back here at Andover. So one thing we're doing next year is a teacher who teaches BC Calculus is taking his materials and he's figuring out how can he offer his BC Calculus class not just to Andover enrolled students in the 1100 program, but also to MS Squared students when they're back home at their other school. Is there any reason we couldn't do that as a way to blend what's happening here on Andover Hill with kids who are very much part of our community but are going back to a less good school? So we've got lots of other exciting things along those lines. We had Saul Khan, who's the founder of Khan Academy here. It was unbelievably fun. He was great with the students. A bunch of our students have been making videos to go on Khan Academy and new exercises with him. We've got a whole bunch of our math teachers are flying out to work on assessments with them in Silicon Valley. So we've got fun and exciting things that we're working on, and we're getting serious about assessing them. So this goes to the question of how do we measure success. We have been working very hard to try to figure out how do we know when it works. So I think we can try all these experiments, and if they're actually not great in terms of what they do, we should abandon them, right? But if we know it's going to work, this is stuff that we should scale. So thank you. Oh, sorry, please come over here.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm in class of 58. I went to Dartmouth, and later when I went back for my last reunion, I was impressed by the fact that they had all the graduating students, and they were all wearing clothes from where they came from, and it was a cornucopia from all over the world. It was like the United Nations. It was extraordinary. And it was not like that when I went there. It was just basically young American white boys that had money. And I'm wondering if, I don't know how it works out. I think one of the most important things that ever happened in Andover happened 40 years ago. You know what that was? Abbott and Andover came together. Likewise, I would like to see more foreign students come to Andover, which is to say, perhaps if we had more foreign teachers here, like from Asia, Africa, South America, wherever, so this becomes more of an international school, but also we get learning from those other teachers from other places.
Thank you. It makes a ton of sense. It's an extremely, extremely important question, and thank you for raising it.
Andover is a great school, but let's make it more of an international school. That's all.
So I think this is a really good conversation point for the strategic plan and for the alumni body to comment on, because there are a broad range of views on this particular topic. I suspect there are very few dissenters at this point that coeducation was a good idea. The notion of having a very broad kind of student body is a great idea in terms of diversity. One place where I see a fair amount of discussion and pushback, honestly, to that thinking has to do with how many kids come from international backgrounds. So right now, about 10% of our student body is international in the sense of carrying a passport internationally. There's a lot of people who have kinds of mixed background. That's about the same percentage as at Harvard, as an example. When we travel to alumni bodies and to places in the United States where it's very, very competitive to get your kid into Andover, there's a lot of sense of we're letting in too many kids from abroad, and we should have more of our Andover community supported in this way. Others, particularly when we go to talk to our families in Asia, as an example, or elsewhere, there's a sense that we should admit more kids from Shanghai. So I think this is a really, really important question, which is what is the composition of the student body? What's the right percentage? We've tried not to be a quota type school, but rather to be the type of school that says, let's look at trying to have the strongest student body we can and have it be very diverse. But of course, we could pull that lever in various directions. I will note, just as an example, when we look at our financial side to that same question, kids who come from abroad tend to be full-pay kids much more than kids who come from the United States. Just as a side note, I think it's a cultural thing. It's probably how we recruit, but it does tend to be that we have a harder time giving away spots in the financial aid sense in international communities where I think families are less comfortable sending kids to American boarding school. And so if we did go that way, we probably would be skewing toward a yet wealthier school, at least given current demographics. And that's not good or bad. I just state that as an interesting angle to what I take to have been an inclusive statement. And hiring international faculty, absolutely. We actually do a fair amount of recruiting very broadly. We try to fit a program, of course, in this respect, and we've had great success and some not success from hiring faculty from outside the U.S., but I think it's an important thing to focus on. So thank you. 2 more minutes. All right. Yes, sir.
Hi, John. Pat McCormick, class of 1983.
Welcome back.
Who also enjoyed John as a professor at Harvard in cyber law, 2005.
Thank you.
Just building on that question about the MOOCs and technology, there's so many exciting things happening in education reform around flipped classrooms, personalized learning. In addition to open courseware and that idea of sharing some of the Andover classes, you mentioned getting better at learning what content is useful for learning outcomes. And that's a big challenge for public schools in America as well as schools around the world. I wonder, do you have any thoughts about sharing not only the content in the classes potentially in ways that enhance Andover's education, but understandably give away some of that content, but also the metadata, the information you're getting about learning to help the rest of schools improve across America and elsewhere?
I think that's a great question, and it's part and parcel of the conversation about how much should we be involved in the public dialogue around education, how much should we be seeing ourselves as an entity that can share a lot of the wealth that's here educationally. I don't know the answer to that because I know it's a very complex and expensive matter to try to meet the current program. And I think that's the kind of question we need to engage with alumni and with the current faculty, which is how much energy do we have to focus on these reform-oriented ideas and to share what we have while we also need to focus on providing the best education for our 1,100 kids. I think one mechanism we're looking at exploring is the idea of setting up an Andover Institute of some kind that would be a way in which some of our faculty members could spend some time as a fellow in the Institute while teaching a reduced course load, bring in some fellows from outside, from higher ed or from elsewhere who would be with those, and bring in some social psychologists and bring in some public school teachers and have an environment where people could share these ideas that wouldn't detract from our classrooms, but in fact enhance it. And that's a matter of needing to raise the money to do that. But I think it could be a really interesting way to get oxygen into the place and to get oxygen from here spreading out and to try out some of these questions without diluting as opposed to diluting, but diluting the experience for the Andover students here. Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm
Not
Edie
least.
Wilson. I'm from Abbott 73,
Welcome
the
back.
last class.
Thank you.
I actually teach at Stanford in the engineering school.
Wow.
And I'm really addressing your first question, which is this past year in my graduate student class, I had 103 students, and only 3 were American-born, 2 Caucasians, and 1 Asian. So the graduate engineering community is just being filled up with foreigners. And I think it's one of the huge challenges, and what we see on the admissions side is we don't have enough qualified students, really from the math and science coming out of high schools. And then when I go and I query the 3 students, all of them were either privately educated, there was one Exonian, and then, or they came from a magnet school. But I think this is one of the big challenges. You know, I love Sal Khan and what he's doing with that whole thing, but you know, really sort of building up our infrastructure and the whole younger education to prepare people. And we've done such a fabulous job at Andover with the liberal arts. But I think, you know, it's not just here, but it's across the board. We've really got to work on the other sides of the curriculum so we can maintain America's leadership in technology and innovation.
Edith, thank you. I think it's a great way to end, because it's a huge challenge and one that doesn't have a simple answer. One good answer I would offer you is there are some amazing kids from Andover coming to Stanford, a couple of girls who know a lot about engineering, and I'm going to send a few of them your way. I would note Gabby Fisher and Devin Berger and Emily Carollo. All 3 were in my winter term hacking class, and they're all going to Stanford, and they're all awesome, and they should all take your course. But that's not an answer other than to say that I think we have to engage exactly that question. It's tied, as you noted, to the previous question about the percentage of international kids versus U.S. kids. It's tied to the question of how do we shape the curriculum in ways that make sense for jobs or jobs that may exist, and how do we affirm and bring forward the values that the school has had for a long time. And I agree, we are a very strong liberal arts school, and we can't and shouldn't turn into a STEM-only environment. But if we don't teach some engineering and some computer science, are we in fact not well serving the kids that are here? And I think that's something we have to engage in the year to come. So please keep sending us your ideas, and I'd love to hear more about your engineering class as it develops. So thank you. So with that, I think we will conclude the webcast and conclude this session in the beautiful sunshine. I'm looking right out the door at a beautiful, great lawn where I'm sure you'd all like to head. But thank you for engaging me on these topics, and I really look forward to hearing more from you, both in the form of question and statement, as we do the strategic plan in this coming year. Thanks so much. Have a great day.